Kim just texted. She said she'd be here in about 10 minutes. Or 10 p.m., I don't know.
Well, go ahead and get started. You want to roll call? You know.
Let's do Brian.
Here.
Sean, absent. Tyler?
Here.
Kim, absent. And John.
Here. So, entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Stands approved. And you want to read us off on the work session?
Yep. You want to go ahead and pull up those annual goals. So one of the things that you have, and I know we're here to talk about annual goals, but one of the things that we will need to be determining is the 3 to 5 year priorities that we have and a third-party consultant. So what we did was, as an administrative team, we tried to go ahead and put our heads together and we just brainstormed. And I think that when we did that day, people were throwing out different people that they had either worked with or thought might be a possibility for that. Something that we will have to do as we move forward is to find out where we want to go with the third party, because I believe the policy indicates that there would be a third party consultant that would be used. And there's, like I said, there's all kinds of things, and some of these people have around the table have worked with them. Some of those I've worked with also. So there's a variety of things. I think that what we'll need to do is we'll need to see how we're going to go ahead and vet those to best meet the needs of what we need to have for our district. Those are just snapshots of things as far as what they do, and you know, I mean, some people in here, like I said, could tell you maybe a lot more about some of these people, but that's just kind of an idea of what we would have for third-party consultants. Do you guys have anything that you want to add to that from the standpoint of the third part, how we brainstormed those or how we got those? Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah,
No, just the two things that we have under vetting, I think those were kind of our two.
The thing I think that would be really important there is on the 21st century learning. You know, if we think that's the big strategic push or the big vision, you know, is kind of who's been there, done that. Mm-hmm. You know, if we could have somebody that you'd be like, hey, I can go to their school and man, they're collaborating, they're communicating, they're creating, and you as administrators look at that and you say, man, I really like what I'm seeing here. If that's a possibility, you know, I think those are the ones that I would move up on the list, because I think a lot of what we'll have to do next semester is okay, what's that vision look like? How do we get the stakeholders in the community to buy in? You know, is this to, okay, this is how things have changed over the last 25 to 35 years. How does our education need to change to do that? And what does that look like? And what's the steps in order to do that? And if we had somebody that's successfully navigated that we could be like, man, this is something I can go and see. And then when we would take that to our stakeholders, you know, I think it adds everything to it. If you want to see in action the vision that we have.
So you'd like to see somebody that's got experience there?
If we get it, you know, and I'm sure, you know, everything comes at a cost, but that would be.
And there's several superintendents that look like.
And I think we should be really open to, you know, if the administrators are like, well, I don't think that's the priority. I think it should be this, and this, and we should prioritize it this way. You know, I'm wide open to that discussion, but let's, you know, think strategically as to what's going to be in our 3 to 5 year plan the hardest thing to solve. And you know, just from my board seat, that's one of the ones that I see is just awfully.
Well, even more globally than that, maybe just that whole idea of college and career ready, because then it kind of encompasses all those things, and that's what, you know.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying is you know, what are those skill sets, and how does that change with what
do you see, like, in our vetting, number one, like we have understanding of PBL, do you feel that it would be more important to put the college and career readiness or 21st century learning? I'm just curious.
I think you guys
mean,
communicated
okay.
the way you think you could take it to our stakeholders the best, but we're talking the
and
same thing. Yeah.
That was my question to you though, John. When those three different things are said, are you thinking the same thing?
Yeah,
okay,
exactly. So when we look at what we want with our high school graduates, you know, what does success look like, and can we all articulate it as a team? This is what we think success looks like.
But I think Carrie brings up a good point, John. Is let's get to a common nomenclature, right?
For sure.
So we got PBL, we got 21st century learning, we got college and career ready. I mean, let's tighten that up, right?
I think, and maybe it's just in my mind and nobody else's, but like PBL is a means to an end rather than the end.
It's a piece of it, right?
But I think college and career ready is our end. Like that's what we want kids to be able to do. Now, PBL obviously encompasses a lot of those things we want, the collaboration, communication, all those pieces. So I think that's, you know, a side note, but I don't think it has to be the, you know, if for some reason somebody hasn't, especially, you know, a couple of those, you know, that might not be Dan Smith or Rourke might not have explicit knowledge of PBL per se, but they definitely know, because we all just did the professional development last week, which was all about a profile of a graduate and what we want our kids to be able to do.
Was that pretty good? Did you think that profile of a graduate, is that helpful? Or?
I think we've talked even as, you know, administratively that we felt like that might be a good, maybe even first step before we bring these people in, so that we know, and the whole vision is to have our district, you know, have some meetings with people to help kind of go through the process that we did.
Get the stakeholder part down
before
we get to the spring. Do you think could that be one of our goals for the fall, is to lay the groundwork for that, so that when we hit in the spring and maybe just develop here's the plan.
I think if you, this is just my personal opinion, I think if you open it up a little bit and you don't narrow it to the PBL, I think some people are going to look at that PBL and they're going to think we want to be a high-tech high, whereas that is an important, there's elements of that, but that's not what we're going to be. I mean, there's other, we're morphing into what you said, 21st century learning. So I don't know. I think that, I don't know if PBL boxes you in more, or if we change that up a bit.
So I like where you're going, and I mean, in other things we've used 21st century learning as kind of the term, right? I mean, that's when we talk about facilities, we're saying, well, be compatible with.
No.
So does that umbrella work?
Now my daughter goes to me. She's like, so I was talking to her about some stuff, and when she heard 21st century learning, you know what she said? That's
just kidding.
So she was just like, and I thought, you know, it kind of caught me off guard.
So not to stifle this, but keep moving forward. And let's get to the same nomenclature, because that's what we're asking out of facilities. And if that's not appropriate, well, then let's.
And that's what they're using in educational circles, that you could communicate to outside people that know what you're talking about, but that did kind of catch me off guard.
Well, that's where and I think the one piece that, if you look at the core and what 21st century includes, it's all those soft skills that we want kids to be able to do. It does not necessarily have the content piece to it. So that's where sometimes, like, what's the whole picture even that everybody needs to have?
Because I've seen it explained as the 4 C's, you know, but that's not all that helpful either. If you're telling somebody, well, what are they?
So I'll keep asking then, what is it college and career ready rather than 21st century? And I get it, if PBL is a component, right?
The trouble with college career though is it could be keep doing what we're doing. You know, let's get them through the standardized tests.
Well, but see, the whole thing with that is though, it's not where that is though, because that's where we have the universal constructs piece. It's just the piece that gets pushed to the side. Universal constructs being things like creativity, collaboration, and those pieces. But I think it starts with, yes, we can use those words, but then it's about defining that for what it means. So career ready no longer means that you graduated in engineering. What are the skills you have to do to be ready to do that? So there's a piece of that, there's that college piece that might be more content related, but there's also those other pieces that are more related to that career. So
just getting that down, because, and it kind of depends where you're at in your walk, right? Because career readiness means different to you than I'm thinking, you know, old school
Right.
back when I was going, you know.
But it
career
could also
readiness,
be,
taking
well,
ACT
we're-
and-
There's a certain amount of, yeah.
But it could also be that we're much more sensitive to just vocational training, or those that aren't going to go on to a four-year school, right?
Right.
Well, career means, what am I doing next year? What am I doing next year, Brady Gully, who's working at Casey's right now and trying to figure out, okay, get your diploma and what are you going to do with it, right?
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
I mean, I like college and career ready, but I just think, I agree fully, whatever that is, let's start talking the same language.
And I think part of it is not, you know, using the words, but also you know, educating everybody.
Yep.
This is what the research says that employers want. That has to be part of what we do.
Because when I've looked at these goals just briefly today, you know, the one thing that struck me was, well, how do you measure some of these things? And if college and career ready is a direction or what we would
Right.
describe as where we're going, well then, do we survey our graduates, and did we provide them with the skills that they needed, whether they went right out into the work world, whether they went to a vocational school, whether they went to a four-year college?
And I think measuring communication and collaboration is a little more challenging as well. I mean, it's just going to be more difficult. And so I think you know, we have to acknowledge that isn't as easy to do as you know, here's how everybody scored on the test.
I think alongside of that too, you know, whatever we define as sort of our success metric, that we need to start like probably long-term thinking about how to communicate that to the community, because as we focus away from possibly some of those like standardized tests and all of that stuff, those scores might dip, right? And I mean, I don't know if they will or won't. But if we're saying we are also tracking other things, we're going to be prioritizing other things in our classrooms. How do we then sort of tell that story of success that may not be identified with some of those standardized tests? And the more I was thinking about it the last couple of weeks, like especially if we are able to kind of like forecast that, so hey, we're going to be moving and trying some of these things, we may see reduced test scores then around some of the standardized things as we be putting more emphasis on, I don't know, I shouldn't say that. Maybe we can keep those same test scores, I don't know.
Well, and sometimes there can be an implementation dip, because when you're really working hard, and teachers are really working hard at implementing, putting more options for creativity and collaboration and things like that, you know, you only have so much time, and so it dips until they really figure out how to mesh the content with those pieces, and then it should bounce back.
Yeah, absolutely. So as long as we're kind of controlling that, like if we can forecast, we're like, hey, we're doing some of this stuff. We know we may take this hit for a year or two in test scores. It doesn't mean the kids are dumber or, sorry, recording. Kids are, you know, not as prepared post Gilbert. It's just the measurements are not quite in sync with where we are going right now.
Just be more focused on engagement. You know, how do we measure that engagement? Because I think we start to win whenever we can figure out that engagement piece of the puzzle.
Well, and I can show you one piece that we've kind of talked about a little bit. There's one training available right now on October 4th. It's called Instructional Practices Inventory, and it's a training that a couple of us in our admin team have taken before. We haven't done it here at Gilbert before, and I kind of printed off a couple so you can kind of get an idea.
Oh, thank you.
So when we talk about a measurable, this kind of gives us, I have one more too. This is one of those things that it's not measuring every single piece of it, but it really gives us an idea. So what you do with this information is we as an administrative team, and maybe even along with our teacher leaders, would do walkthroughs. And they're very quick walkthroughs. I mean, they're literally, and we just keep going kind of around. A good sample at one point is to get at least 100 observations. And we're not talking about like I'm sitting down and really what you do is when you walk in the door, you try to figure out where are kids at on this. Obviously our goal being 5s and 6s. And there's really not any difference between a 5 being better than a 6. It's really just defining that a 5 are those, their kids are engaged in higher order conversations, so that engagement piece. And then a 6 is they're actually maybe working on a project that has real higher level value to it. So,
This is cool.
and then the next piece is, and so what you get all done, when you get all done with all your observations, you basically have a big huge pie graph. And you'll be able to see what percent of the time were we in each of these. Now, you know, it may be that if we spend a tremendous amount of time in force, which is like teacher lecture, essentially, teacher directed instruction, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, but you start to have that conversation and create goals with individual buildings about how do we move that past that. If we see one area that's really over, now if we see a ton of 5 and 6s, we're good. We're not gonna worry about it. But you know, if you kind of go through that pie chart, and it's really about having that conversation about, we know that 5s and 6s are where we're gonna find the highest level of student engagement and where kids are gonna be excited and ready to learn, and those are gonna be those skills that we want them to have. And so this is just one way to put a measure on it, because one of the things we can do, we can get a baseline score, and then we create a goal. Boom, there's your SMART goal in terms of what you want to do.
And then it kind of leads into the idea is if we're in 3s and 4s, that's okay. And the idea is okay, now we can start saying, okay, how do we move the bar up? And some classes will be 3s and 4s as a nature of, you know,
Depends on when you go in there. It just depends
some
on
of
when
these subjects will be that way, right?
Well, if an observation happens to be during a time, I mean, that's just the way it is.
Particular time of the class.
Yeah.
You know, if you happen to catch them in the last 10 minutes,
Yeah.
it might be work time to get started on the assignment or whatever.
That is exactly correct.
But if you're taking enough observations, then you'd be like, okay, this is a reasonable assessment.
So this might be used as a rubric or a measure that we could establish some
It'd be a
goals at
great
some
student
point.
engagement measure, because we can walk in and we can see. And it's not, I mean, it's obviously based somewhat on the perception of the evaluator going in, and
Yeah, right.
but it's not attitudinal data. I mean, it's really hard data. You walked in and this is what kids were doing at that time. So
How do you suppose teachers would feel about something like this?
I think it's important to know how it's used, and that one of the things that, because I've gone through the training, is it's important that you don't, even though a teacher's going to come up to you and say, what was I, 1, 2, 3, you know, what was I? It's not even about that. Maybe at certain buildings we talked about, and I talked about this with Vic, and is if you have like, you could maybe do department, but you want to be really careful that your sample size is large enough that it doesn't necessarily pinpoint one time and place that it's really bigger than that.
And then creating teacher groups that they're saying, hey, here's the nut we have to crack.
Yeah.
You know, that really, let's strategize how this, you know,
Absolutely.
we don't pretend to be the holders of the knowledge. You know, if you teachers can get together and say, gosh, how do we start moving the bar?
Is it, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Nope, that's fine.
You know, as we looked at the sort of like things we've done around PBL for the last year or possibly 2 years, when that's really jamming, do you think, is that hitting that 5 and 6 mark when those things are really rolling?
And even with our AIW work for the past 8 years, it hasn't necessarily been pervasive and across the board, but when people are really planful and using those good lessons that they've evaluated using AIW framework, that's when you see that 5s and 6s as well. And that's where we've done some of that work. What we've seen is teachers are turning in great lesson plans when we do our sample they're scoring really high in those things that we want them to. We're just trying to figure out then how do you take that information and make it that's how we do business all the time.
That's what we had them, that's what, I mean, what the information that we gathered last year, that we did a correlation between the task that the teachers turned in from the PBL unit, and then how did that student work match up to that?
Yeah. Well, and I think as they, you know, to me, as this is emphasized by administrators that saying, hey, this is one of the things that I'm being evaluated on, instantly you start saying, I want to, you know, respond to that and problem solve on that. So, yeah, that was good.
Thoughts on that?
The only other thing, and I'll just pass this out really briefly, if we got specific to PBL, we did, and Carrie, maybe you want to speak to this one a little bit more, the project design rubric and how we would evaluate that piece.
Test on this one.
Yeah, this is a big boy.
Sorry, it's very wordy, but just so you have the information.
We have, we gave this to teachers last year as a tool, as they were looking at their units. So what our plan to do this year is as they, because what we don't want to do, I want to back up just for a sec. We don't want them, as they're turning units in, don't turn something in that you already know is, you know, like, I'll use Youth Marketplace as a prime example of that. scored high, the task scored high, the student work scored high. It's doing great. There's nothing in there that you need, that you want to tweak, because it's good. This is about, as we're working on it, as they're working on a new unit, it doesn't have to be a capstone unit. It can be something they're already doing. But as you look at the different areas, for example, sustained inquiry, the critique and revision, those are areas that a lot of times are harder to, just in the amount of time that teachers have, it's harder to devote a lot of time to that. So maybe you're just going to focus. You're going to say, this is where my big focus is going to be, and this is where I'm at now. These are the things I'm going to, that I need to do to get it over to that include features of effective PBL. Another part of that is not doing this on your own. What we expect of students, what we expect teachers to be doing in the classroom, we need to be doing that same thing with teachers. We need to have teachers need to be collaborating together. Teachers need to be talking and critiquing each other's, and when I say critiquing, I'm just saying, being that critical friend.
Yeah.
Looking at, okay, hey, this is what I'm expecting. What do you think? Brainstorming together. That's exactly, and this is a tool for that.
So how do we, if that's something we want to work on, like how do we put measures around that?
Well, and this would be a very easy one to create a goal on, because it'd be hard to have a baseline goal per se, because that's very perceptual. But one of the things that we would do, we kind of talked about, is teachers creating a goal based on the feedback that they've now gotten a couple years in a row on their unit plans about things that we felt like they could do better, and we tried to give that feedback this last time, and then say, okay, I'm going to create a goal. And this was kind of an aha moment for us, because we had some plans, and this was kind of these 8 essential components of a PBL were kind of their framework of how they had to describe their project-based learning project or unit. And several of them, it got to like the critique and revision. Yeah, that wasn't I don't have it, and that's okay, because it's good. They owned that, and they didn't try to like make up something that wasn't there in the first place. But then they can come back and say, okay, one of our goal areas, my goal area is critique and revision, and I'm going to make sure that my unit plan has those pieces that would get us to an effective PBL, high levels of effective PBL. So that's 3. So then, in terms of the measurement piece, as Brian was talking about, we kind of focus in on that goal area for them, and then when we look at their unit plans in the spring this time, what we would be looking at is we'd look at all those pieces, but we'd really hone in for the measure on their goal. Yeah. So if somebody said critique and revision, then our goal as those people kind of evaluating the units is to come here and say, were they in the first column, the second middle column, or the last column? And so what we can create as a goal is we want 100% of our teachers to be able to to be in the effective PBL column when the unit plans are assessed in the spring.
And then we tie it into the professional development of, oh gosh, this is the one that I struggle with. Okay, well, let's work on that.
Well, and that is our goal too, is to, that we talked about, is having those, those throughout the year, being able to, like, hey, if critique and revision is a thing, we're going to get together, and those people who have that goal, we want to talk about that. That's what we're going to be really working on, is those strategies.
Well, and this last year, the first year, we really just used the AIW tool. The first year. Last year, we still used AIW, and I would be a strong proponent of not getting rid of that language. I think that language works. And we have the measures for it already. And I think that if you start changing it, then you're fooling with, are you really getting what you thought you were going to get?
And
you don't know
no reason, if we're all on the same level of understanding.
But I think by really focusing on the 8 essential elements and having the teachers really reflect on that, I think that helped them in that deeper learning for it too. So I think that this is just going that much deeper for them.
So that's where goal, if you take a look at that under the 21st century learning, that goal that the teachers will create based on their previous PBL outcome, that's what you can use as far as the
bullet points will be kind of looking.
Well, and so like I kind of like wordsmith one, like by May 2018, and this is wordy, so please, if somebody, my English teachers, maybe will have to help me. But by May 2018, teachers will create a goal based on the 2017 PBL feedback to improve a specific area or areas, if there's 2 places they want to focus, based on in the PBL lesson design as measured by the PBL project design rubric, and we can also have that piece would also be another measurable for us as our AIW measure, and so we kind of have 2 assessment pieces that go into that one goal.
So you'd specifically state using this rubric. I think that's important.
Yeah. And we could probably even have, I did, and the AIW framework.
Yeah.
This rubric is going to relate specifically to that goal area that they're going to have, whereas the AIW is, like Carrie said, you also got to make sure we're looking at the big picture of it all too. So.
I have a question on that. Do they have to, by the way that goal is written, they don't have to use their same unit that they used?
Nope.
Okay, I just want to make sure of that.
It's really just, I said based on the PBL feedback, because somebody may have a unit, it might have actually scored pretty well, but like maybe they got some feedback that, that there really didn't seem to be a lot of student choice and voice in this. And so really that may be an area that they focus on. And it could be one, it may not be completely based on our PBL feedback. Maybe they just have self-reflected and know that that's an area that they want to concentrate on.
No, I just wasn't, because some people might want to,
We have people who've now used the same unit a couple times in a row, and that's okay because, again, critique and revision is important. You have to go back. But like Carrie said, we also want to make sure that we're growing it to some things.
So does that help? Because I know some of you mentioned about that there wasn't a measurable part of this. Does that help with that?
Or what was the measurable part?
Or what was it?
What was the measurable piece?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that we're moving towards, we're all using the same process, or in this case, a rubric, whether that's AIW or this or both.
I think
and that's institutionalizing the project-based learning, right? So.
And this won't be new. I mean, we use this.
yeah, they've seen, our teachers have seen
work
this.
from it. It'd just be that everybody has that same lens of.
Now it's written down that that's what we're going to use.
We had teachers last year, one thing we did have teachers do is we had them rate themselves as where they were on the project-based learning spectrum. And so this is now taking that off of them and really now the unit itself.
How would you guys see, so I think this all sounds great. How would you see then eventually, so then we kind of go to classrooms and we're starting to say, hey, it looks like we're trending in the right direction, the students are getting engaged. Then just for for 2018, then that engagement measure would just be kind of those observations is what we would use is kind of the thing, and that eventually we would be able to say, gosh, here's where we judge students to be, however we would do that, to say that, okay, now we get that, because I agree with you, we got to start at the teacher level before we're at the student level, but that we would, eventually we would get to kind of where student engagement is at, and then start developing plans for students to move them to 5 and 6 versus 3 and 4, whatever the case may be on communication and collaboration.
No, I was just going to say, we throw AIW out, just throw this big term of AIW out there. And I would invite you, if you're interested, we're going to do a kickoff. We've continued to do this with our new teachers. And then we do a kickoff it sounds silly, but it's what we call it, in mid-September, so where we'll take a half a day, get subs for them, and they'll come in and we'll go over the terminology. And then we start scoring, and we have a scoring session probably every 6 weeks with our new teachers. Just because it's important as they're working with their teams. We might not have specific scoring sessions anymore, dedicated time where we're doing that, but it's important that those teachers have that background so that when they go to their teams, they understand that vocabulary and they're kind of get on the same level playing field. My point of saying this is, I think if you ever, I will be happy to get you those dates. We're going to be setting those up next week. And if you ever want to sit in on that and see what that looks like and, how when we're looking at student work or we start with tasks and what kind of feedback teachers get for that. We would love for you to sit in on that if you ever want to do that.
It would be weird to have a board member there, because I'd love to do it.
Well, it's just really listening.
We're just people.
I know.
And I feel like
Scary people.
But I think
did we not do one of the things we've done early on is especially when we were moving this from high school, then we kind of funneled down and we did what was called like a fishbowl. And I feel like we did this at a board meeting one time, but I can't, when we were still in library, where we basically come and we kind of mimic a scoring session, so you kind of have an idea. And you guys watch, you could certainly participate too, but you kind of watch us going through this process and kind of getting an idea of, oh, that's what they're doing in that conversation. This is what the conversations are like. This is what so that's definitely something we can also
So I'm gonna play totally naive, and like I just walked in, and like I'm a new board member, because you're gonna have at least one new board member, right, in September. Being naive and not being a teacher and not being in the school system, is the goal ultimately that every unit go through this criteria? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but as we, you know, like through my entire time on the board, right, we've gone through TLC, and we've gone through AIW, and we've talked a lot about differentiated learning and all of those things. And everything that we're talking about right now, and this attacks every student every day, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, because it hits the reader, it hits the visual learner, it hits the hands-on person, it hits everything. So is the goal ultimately that every unit go through this criteria?
I would say, and I can speak for pre-K2, not necessarily pre-K2. And the reason is because we already know what research says about quality reading instruction, and it's not an inquiry approach.
Sure.
And the same, even with math, there's definitely, the research is the opposite, where there is a little bit more of an inquiry approach, but you also still have to be aware of some of those things. What we've kind of talked about is making sure that if there's at least a couple of these pieces, like maybe I am doing a reading, which we know explicit instruction is key, but how can I build in something that of these elements, like how can I build in student choice and voice in that instruction to make sure, is it through book choice or those types of things? How can I make sure they're doing critique and revision? So not maybe everything has that final public product at the end, but that there's definitely these elements are woven through all of our, yes.
Yeah, I would say that every student should experience this throughout some part of their day. You know, not their whole day, there's no way. I mean, there's just certain things that have to be explicitly taught. I mean, but I do think that ultimately it is using a different lens as you're looking. And it's the same way we started with AIW.
Right. But there are just some subjects that seem like they fit in here. And I feel bad for those teachers who are constantly trying to make this work because it works. But it's more planning, it's more...
But what we don't want teachers to do is we don't want them to think, oh my gosh, I have to start all over again.
Sure.
I have to create, no, you don't have to create a whole new unit. You just have to, okay, what are we doing? What's something that you're doing that we can, that meets some of this already? Because our teachers are doing those things.
Right. That's my point.
Yeah.
Have we just not identified some things that they're already doing? Are there projects that fit here that we haven't evaluated and
that the most effective projects that we had, that when we turned in, were ones where they just took a normal unit that they were already doing and they made tweaks to it. The ones that were least successful was when they started with the public product and create this flash and this big capstone, but then they forgot all those other things before that.
Okay.
That's kind of counterintuitive for someone who's coming in from the outside thinking it's this big public display thing, and really you're saying the most success we've had is actually just taking a pretty standard thing and adding these.
Well, it was really interesting because we've talked, we've been really like, oh, they're only focusing on the product, they're not focusing on the process, and that's good. And then we all went to this training and we're like, no, they need to do both. Because if you only focus on process and you don't care what the outcome is at the end, that's not real world either.
Yeah.
Because you've got to go back and fix it.
And that's sort of the collaboration and the creativity and all of that.
I think some of our teachers, I mean, I don't want to say scared, but I would say nervous, thinking that all PBL had to be youth marketplace.
Yeah, right.
And that it had to be this, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to get done? I mean, how am I going to get this content? And that's not about the content, but
the challenge is the amount of time that it takes. Like, to do a project, it just takes time. And when you have X number of standards and benchmarks you have to hit, and some of them you have to hit twice because not everybody got it. It's I don't think every unit could be. There's just not enough time.
And I think that's going to be some of the that we run into are, I think what we're established to hit are these standards and benchmarks, and they haven't moved yet. And I think the standards are going to be moving to where where we're going, but it's when are they going to move the goalposts so that, that we cannot spend so much time on the benchmark.
So at that 21st century training, they do have rubrics for measuring creativity. They gave us a free sample of that. The other ones you have to buy, but then for those 4 C's, they have rubrics already established where, you know, if we wanted to measure those and you know, even if we said our goal is to increase creativity and we're going to increase this one particular part in the rubric, I don't remember, I don't have mine with me, but there was like 4 or 5 different things in creativity, wasn't there? Like, and so you could just pick one thing maybe out of that rubric and say, okay, in this unit I'm going to really incorporate this or whatever. You can measure that across your building or across the district if you wanted to focus that way.
My fear is just always that a project, you know, that our people come in and a project is something big and significant and worthy of being shared. There are so many things that I think we already do that could be classified as projects and project-based learning and hands-on, and it's just important to me that we don't, you know, maybe we can evaluate it based on this, but maybe it's not flashy and
well, and if you look at the 2 criteria for what public product is their work is made public. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to have a huge thing, and that they're also asked to explain their reasoning and how they got what they did. So you're right, it doesn't have to be.
And I can just tell you with my own kids is when they knew they were presenting to somebody outside, I mean, their level of engagement, boom. I mean, all of a sudden I have my son in the living room saying, hey, I want to practice my speech, Dad. And it's because that there's somebody from outside that they have to present to, and it just changes. And now they're engaged because I don't want to look foolish. I can live with it with my classmates. I'm not going there with some people I don't know.
I'm excited about this because I think even as when we are looking at unit plans, you know, I just hit the public product. I would say almost all of our public products, even the ones that we thought were awesome, kind of hit in the middle. They're presenting information, but they're not really talking about the process. And if you remember the movie we watched, that High Tech High, it was less about like, ooh, look at this awesome thing we built, which it was awesome, but it was more about, well, this is how I did it, and this is why I did it, and then I screwed it up, and I had to change it.
And they're all just engaged, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the key element that I think we can take away is that engagement.
Coming back to this, do we need to add another one under the 21st century learning that speaks to measuring engagement?
Well, I think that's maybe what we say is this, and I don't know, we can write it lots of different ways.
Do we need to?
Whatever gets us started down.
To me, it could be a component, like, you know, some of the strategic plans and some goals and things that I've read through. This might be our base goal, and it might be based on the project design rubric, but then you also have some sub-measurables, other things that kind of like ways that you're benchmarking that progress along the way. And so maybe that is the IPI inventory, you know, some of those other pieces go into it.
Well, was that your intention with this, though, to start looking at that as a potential goal down the road?
We definitely could. I think that's
I mean, which I would agree would be in the same category, but this is about process and what the expectations are set with the teachers on how they go about it, to what degree, how often, but a process. This is a measure of, well, what's the level of engagement, which is, I could see as separate.
Yeah, this kind of, to me, is kind of the rubber hitting the road. That, okay, here's all of these great processes that we're doing in the school. Now when we go into the classrooms, we're seeing it happen.
Yeah.
So to me, you know, as a board member, this is you know, how fast, you know, we're able to say, gosh, we have confidence in this. I think you need some time to tinker with it to say.
Well, what I heard was be careful at what level, and I fully understand that organizationally. So then is it, you start off by doing that at the building level, right? So that no teacher feels intimidated by, okay, was I a 3 or was I a 5, or what was my average, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's at the, I don't know, you tell us, department, building, grades.
And the elementary is going to have a built-in advantage just because younger kids come engaged. And middle school is going to be a little tougher, and high school is going to be the toughest.
Well, and I think we aren't going to know until we have some baseline data.
Right,
I mean,
right.
that's
the goal.
That's
So
what
I
it
think
is right there.
I think
That's the goal right
there.
there.
Build
Yes.
a process to
Yep.
to collect data and collect it for 1 year,
Yep.
so we know what we're working with.
Because then we'll know where do we want to go from here.
Absolutely.
We can't say until we know what it is.
Well, and maybe in an effort to, you know, keep goals, the number of goals manageable, and I don't want to, it's not my baby, so I shouldn't say it, but like the scale, maybe scale doesn't become a district goal. You know, it's still measurable, it's still stuff, it kind of still fits in with the whole PBL, but maybe we don't worry about that as a very...
For right now, we have 9 kids in it.
Right.
So to me, I had that in mind too.
This is going to be more global.
This is more for
I think we still need to do what's on there, but it's not something that is.
Yes, yeah, I think we.
I think we're
as
doing
long as
it.
you guys know
Yeah,
that, hey,
I
we
would-
want to keep an eye on that,
Yeah.
because that could be a big piece of
But-
it down the road, but
Yeah.
until we see what that looks like, we can't.
And it's
can't
really
put
a
all our
building
eggs in that
specific goal,
basket.
really,
Yeah.
you know?
Sure.
It's hitting the high school as opposed to...
But you're not doing that at the elementary, huh?
Right now.
Okay.
No, I'm sending some people to work with you.
I love that. I love that. I do diapers.
So I think that might be, you know.
So a goal around the teachers using project design rubric and AIW, and then a second goal around student engagement using the instructional practices inventory, getting some baseline.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, we have to do the APR just because we have to do it.
Yeah, probably one more that, I don't know how we put this, that maybe to put in there, or we just know what's going on in the back burner, but you know, what plans do we have to lay for, you know, the timing of you know, laying out the 3 to 5 year plan, because I think these are all going to be centerpieces of that 3 to 5 year plan. And so, you know, what does that look like, and the resources for that. So I would love to hear from you guys, as a board, have we given you guys as the resources to undertake what we're talking about, or do we need you know, someone that's going to ride herd on some of this stuff? You guys feel like you've got enough people to do this? Because, and the reason why I say this is you know, just my experience on the board is it's just very tough for us to sit down in a room and have these kind of talks, which kind of lends me to, you know, staffing's an issue with regard to doing some of these things. And so I don't want an answer tonight, but I want, you know, serious feedback from you of, we can't have expectations and we don't staff it. And so I just think that's a fair discussion to have of we're asking for a lot. And so if we're going to ask, are we giving you the resources to be successful?
One thing that I would say from my point of view is, by adding back, last year we added money back to curriculum, and this year it's supposed to be fully funded again. And I do think that's going to make a big difference in the fact that, for example, the materials that we have purchased, K-5 for reading comprehension and writing, really have a lot of the components that you're talking about built into them. And so I think that by having the money to, and it's not about materials, it's not about, I mean, the curriculum purchasing, what it was 10 years ago and what it is now, are very, very different. I mean, we didn't just go out and buy some flashy, you know, Basel series that had every piece bell and whistle. No, you know, we bought components of where we felt was going to be best for our students. So.
Were you going to say something?
I said a question, but you can go.
I was just going to add, I've heard John, Kim, Brian, Tyler, they've said that time and time again. They want to make sure that we feel that we have the backing and the financial support that's there. And this isn't the first time they said it, they've said it time and time again. So as we're talking about this, if we feel that there are some areas, I think that they mean what they say.
I think the only other part that I can think right now that goes along, just in terms of how we do business, is really protecting our professional development. You know, when it comes to negotiation and when it comes to some of those things, some of the easiest things to do is, well, you know, take some time off here, don't, you know, and I really feel like to do some of this work and do it really, really well, people have to have professional development time. It's not going to be something they can just independently do on their own during their prep time. And, you know, you lose the collaboration component of that because, you know.
Was that pretty effective for you guys last week? Do you think that was a good use of your time? You know?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Wonderful.
I agree. And I have to say, the one that I participated in, you know, I was really disappointed in the people who chose to leave because they were given the option to leave for the afternoon. I feel that we all have to be on board, that we feel that we believe professional development is important. If we're willing to put out a full day, everyone should be on board. And I don't know how you get there.
it speaks to engagement.
Yeah, yeah. So the engagement has to affect the student.
Well, it's got to start.
You know, I mean, it just has
starts
to,
right
has
here.
to start with us.
But I think
So-
that time that's been devoted the last 2 years for project-based learning is the reason why it's been so receptive and that our teachers are doing well, because we are giving them the time to dig in, to collaborate, to really develop. and
I think it's
practice
helped
and
when
try.
you guys have allowed us to take time. You allowed us to go to New Orleans to project-based learning. I mean, and we were learning on the go too.
Well, that's a big
But
lesson. That's why I worry about the
That's
resources. This is, I know that this
We'll
is
find someplace.
a big change.
So a question I have, because we have talked a lot about this rubric and using that for as a goal, and then going through this training. So when looking at 21st century learning as a goal, or whatever we want to call it, then the components under it, PBL is really the only specific one. I mean, IPI, student engagement, and then our APR. Student engagement is going to be measurable by our by the product, by the task, and by our observations. The APR goals are met by a multitude of strategies that are being used to give our kids the way to do things. But that PBL one is just then more specific. Do we like that? You know what I mean? And maybe we do, and I'm fine with that, because I think we have the data to support that.
It's probably a
But
little tight,
I
but I
just
think
want-
that's kind of what, you know, what we were working on before. Now we're blowing it up.
Well, I mean, maybe is it what, I don't know who said it over on the side of the table, but is it that we find a way that every student has some component of this in their day? You know, like, could we twist it to, not twist it, alter it to make it more student focused, saying like that, I don't know how to measure this, but.
Well, it'd be interesting to hear what the students say. Are they engaged, right? I don't know how.
Oh, no, sorry, not on the engagement side, but on the, just specifically on the PBL side, like,
Okay.
are they experiencing some level of PBL in an average day at Gilbert? I don't know how to measure it, that'd be the crazy part, but that's kind of what I heard, and I like that part of it. And
But
maybe it
that's
does
kind of-
start as this year is tweaking what was done last year, but at some point, do we want to have it being measured on the student side?
I think you need both. And I guess I'd like to your question, Amy, I'd like to hear from the administrative team. Do you think it's too narrow? As a board member, I can tell you my perspective is, what I've heard over the years is don't change course real fast, right? So if we're going to do something, stay the course. And so for that reason, it would make sense to me as a board member that we continue to list it specifically as project-based learning, so that we're showing, well, we're staying the course, we're not, okay, we're jumping on a new bandwagon. But we rely on you guys to say, well, actually it needs to be broader than that, or, so I think we need your feedback.
Well, and I'm totally bringing it up. I mean, that was the goal we kind of set down and created and thought
Yeah.
was. So I'm kind of going back just as we're thinking bigger picture.
But that could be
I
next
just wanna
sprint too.
talk-
So that's
So we
what
can
I'm
be
kind of
laying some
thinking.
groundwork for our next 3 to 5 year goals.
For the
and I think
strategic
this is
plan.
But the other
Yeah.
thing we can too is, if you think about that, right now it says 21st century learning at the top, but if we do decide that actually what we're really saying is college and career ready, that all of a sudden is a little, it encompasses student engagement, because they have to have these things, and PBL as a more specific. So I think it then, maybe just tweaking, I mean, I know technically we weren't gonna change our 3 to 5, but I mean, I think it's just a slight language
Use a different language, yeah.
piece that then really kind of says, actually, this is what we're really thinking about that. And
So, as one board member, I'm comfortable with it, and that was my reasoning why, is, well, I felt like it maintained some continuity from what we've established over the first few, because the first year we brought that up, well, it wasn't quite so, oh yeah, let's just jump on board, right? We had to have some conversations, what does it look like, what does it really mean? So I would say, I would be comfortable leaving it at that level. But as John's brought up and Lindsay brought up earlier with this list is, well, we need to go into some long-term strategic planning, and then do we change the nomenclature? Do we clarify it more?
Yeah, and setting the stage for that whole stakeholder
Yep.
engagement of, okay,
Yep.
what's the community telling us, you know, that this, you know, career, college and career ready looks like, what life skills, you know, it almost is college, career, and, you know, whatever else makes a student complete. I don't know what the word is for that, but that would be the locking, you know, good communication.
And I agree. You know, my first few years on the school board, we jumped from initiative to initiative, and we had you know, I had to have a dictionary of acronyms just to keep up. And I feel that we've really leveled, and AIW's been with us for a long time. PBL should be with us for a long time. The underlying foundation of each of those initiatives are things that we want to carry forward. If it develops into something more, great. But I think for our parents, you know, I even remember parents, you know, commenting, well, what is this? What is this? Or, you know, we're doing something new this year? Well, no, we're not. It just has a new name. Well, let's remain consistent with our stakeholders and let them feel good about it.
Well, and I think you're right, because you know, with AIW, because we did it so long, and now adding PBL and having that be that other piece that's like that, because oftentimes what happens when you do those, like, you know, we're going to learn CGI today, and we're going to learn this, you know, this strategy and your reading strategy, it becomes for teachers, they're like, oh, that's just a tool in my toolbox, and I can choose to use it when I want, as opposed to, this is how I do it. You know, this is, you know, I think how they explained it at the training we went to, it's not like, it's like, this is the plate. Like, this is what it all kind of fits on, and this is how we do it. No.
And I think what you said, like, on the change in the what we're evaluating on is the big part. You know, when we start saying, okay, how does the collaboration and the communication look? When we start saying that's going to be more the focus than the APR goal, that's when we know, hey, we're really buying this vision. You know, and so I don't know how we make that transition, but that's when I'll know that, okay, we're all on the same board with what the vision is. The vision is if we have kids that are good at the collaborating and the communicating and the creating, and our measurement processes are for that. And the APR, yeah, we want to hit those targets, but that's not our focus. It's going to be these measuring systems and have that in each building.
I think that goes back to what Brian was saying about how the community, so if those standardized tests fall back, at least we've got another measure to say, okay, well, but look at what we're doing here, look at how we've grown here, look at what the kids are engaged with. You know, so I think it's...
And then I think, you know, we can be good advocates for you, because if I had to pick for my kids of doing good on those APR scores, or, you know, real nailing and the collaborating and the communicating, you know, hopefully they do both, but boy, I think that's the right part of the emphasis for us as a school board.
We're gonna have to nail that communication though, because I think there's a lot of the historic communication that's been around some of those APR style goals.
Yes.
You know, and so when we shift from that, either people are gonna be like, whoa, why are we shifting, or why is this possibly dropping?
Well, and I think the shift goes with our new 3 to 5 year plan.
I think too, though, and I know that I said, oh, we're gonna be doing a different assessment. I mean, we are gonna be, this will be the last year of Iowa assessment. And I think as we roll out what that looks like, I think that everything you're talking about is going to be what kids have to do to be successful on these new assessments.
That's awesome to hear that.
Yeah, I really do. I think that, you know, they're going to have to be critical thinkers. They're going to, I mean,
and do you feel like for us to embrace one, we have to give up the other? For me, I see that if we really embrace PBL and all of these things so that our kids can be hands-on and active and everyone can be engaged, shouldn't the APR continue to do what we've been doing in the past? We shouldn't have to sacrifice standardized testing because we're engaging our kids. It should, in my mind, it should do just the opposite, shouldn't it?
I don't know. I think that because we don't know what it is, we don't know what it's going to look like. I think that when it first rolls out, I don't know what, I think our scores could do a little bit. But I think with everything that we're doing, I personally do believe our kids will be successful.
Well, and to kind of answer that, so some of the training that we've done and kind of the foundation of everything right now is this John Hattie, and he does visible learning, and he's taken all these instructional practices and different things that we do in schools, and he's basically done meta-analysis and created an effect size for all of those. And I will say, like, for example, right now PBL is really low. Like, it basically says putting a PBL program into place doesn't really have a high effect size. Reason being because usually the effect size is measured on student achievement. You know, they're not creating individual measures based on they're based on what does that culminating student achievement goal look like. So I don't know that any of us don't think that PBL is a good thing or a right thing, I think, but we also have to realize there probably is going to be, because right now with what sometimes people do and put in place in terms of PBL isn't necessarily correlating those two very well, that would lead us to get good high student achievement. So it's not that we're not doing it well, we're just not doing it effectively. I mean, it's got, so those are the pieces. So yes, I agree that I think when we're really humming and doing the PBL pieces well and we're integrating the right way, I think yes, the student achievement will follow. But kind of at first you kind of do it crappy. And so, you know,
it's a learning curve.
Yeah,
You
so
also have
then
to teach the kids how to, like, we don't teach kids how to collaborate, we just expect that they know it.
Yeah.
And so the time that you spend laying that groundwork is time that you're not spending, you know, covering the content. And so, you know, I think the teachers work their guts out to get the scores that we get. You know, when we have a goal in 8th grade science, there's only 7 kids in a whole class that aren't proficient. You know, so to think we're going to be able to maintain that and have a little less time to do it, I think we're going to see a fallback of some. So maybe instead of 7, we're back down to 9 or 10 or 11 that aren't proficient. You know, and that's not good. We're going to work on that. But I just think that there's going to be you can't maintain where we're at, I don't think, and change things too.
And I think but we'd be light years ahead.
Right. I'm not saying
when we're saying,
you
know what, he needs to work on collaborating, and here's how we're going to do it.
I think long term, what's best for our graduates is this road.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that the measure, it doesn't measure that.
And like Carrie said too, is when we were talking about that the assessment, you know, the whole idea behind Smarter Balance is it was kind of assessing kids in a more reasoning, you know, some of those higher level thinking ways. The problem is right now that's not what we have with Iowa assessments. You know, it's very much knowledge, like what knowledge do you have, as opposed to you can't really reason through it. And so I think as we see an assessment move towards the values, reasoning and thinking and problem solving.
And that's the year after this? This is the last year?
Yes, this is the last year, supposedly.
And it could be, it's still created by Iowa assessments, because I think that was why they dialed back, because they wanted Iowa testing to have a voice in the assessment that was created.
So do we have what you need for 21st century, Lindsay?
I think so. What I'll do is,
Do we know what we're going to call it? Are we calling it 21st century?
I think we're going to stick with that for now, right? That's what we decided.
I'm good with
Okay.
that.
That's good.
And
Okay.
then we can change it next spring.
Yeah. That's, yeah, that'd be a good, I mean, that would.
Yeah, that'd be the signal, hey,
Yeah.
it's changing.
Stacy, maybe this is not the place for conversation, but so this is very similar to like scoring instruction in AIW, I would say.
Right.
Teachers are already familiar with that because we've done it before. Is this the better route to go, or using that rubric?
So if you think about what we measure in AIW, obviously it is to improve student engagement, but the measure itself is not always focused on what the kids are doing. With the exception of maybe student work, but instruction, the other pieces that we measure, when we assess the task, that doesn't necessarily say what kids are going to do with it at the end. Or how engaged they were during that.
Yeah.
Now, student work's a little different, but again, when you have usually student work is a thing, it's not going to tell us how engaged they were necessarily.
Yeah, because you can be successful at completing the thing, but
And
be totally engaged because it's not challenging.
Yeah.
Okay.
should we look at strategic resourcing and support the vision? Under this one, and again, maybe this is one that bothers you because how do you evaluate that, or how do you measure something like that? We are going to be working with Hala and Associates on trying to implement this strategic plan and making sure that it does meet that 21st century learning. The measurement part is how are you going to measure it is the biggest thing probably.
Well, do you want to walk through, milestones, Lindsay? I mean, what would you see as the milestones that we have?
I would think that we would go ahead and we're going around with the second round of meetings with those community groups. I would think that we would go ahead and want to make sure that as we meet with each of those community groups that we talk about what 21st century learning is, and that we have that built into those different things as we narrow that down as far as what we're going to look at for those projects.
Do we want to include any sort of mention like that we're put a bond together, or
That's what I wondered too.
Yeah, something like that. Like we do have some like pretty.
There's an October prioritization meeting. There's a either February or April bond issue. I mean, those would be milestones.
Yep.
I think the measurable is more like check, 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 rather than a percentage of this or more assessment.
Yeah, and I do like that, it's all of us working together, but we'll all be working together towards a prioritization meeting, and and decisions in October, it's my
Yeah,
understanding.
yep.
Right.
And then preparing for a bond issue that would either be February or April of 2018.
And somewhere in between those would be a really solid communication piece to the community as to like, hey, here's what we're going after.
Yeah, so as we think about if you use a similar tool through this next year for these goals, those could be some of the columns on that tool.
Okay.
Wouldn't have to be that much detail in my mind for just the overview, but I do think there are some specific milestones that, that we've got to hit if it's going to be successful.
What's post, is there anything like post bond that we would want to
Sorry.
Post bond.
James.
What are you saying,
What do
Brian?
you do after?
Well, I don't know, like, I mean,
What happens
so,
after
so the measure passes and.
Yeah.
Yeah, what happened, yeah.
That's
Would
when
it
the
be
fun
there-
begins. What do you mean?
Would it be like your estimated completion of the project?
Completion start, yeah, when
Yeah.
is the?
I don't know, no, I don't know, I mean, I've never been through this process, so I don't know.
I would expect that in October, we'll prioritize, come to decision on what we're proposing to be within the bond, but already in that, it would be some of the prioritization as far as timelines. What might be something that would be right out of the gate? What might be something that, well, that's been put into the bond, but that doesn't need to happen for 2 or 3 more
Okay.
years. So
So, well, maybe it's just that, sorry to interrupt.
So all of that would be built into this planning, which, I mean, it's now August, we've got a couple more months, and
Yeah.
we need to be there. Then there is the communication with the community to get buy-in for the bond, then there's the actual election of the bond, and then, I mean, if that's February or if it's April, there won't be too many months left in this school year, but there might be some that we say, that was in that bond, so that we could do it next summer, so that it's done for the school year that starts in
Yeah.
2018.
And there isn't
That'd be aggressive.
anything wrong with checking the box before the year's over either.
Right.
What's others?
I think focus on the bond really needs to be our priority this year,
Mhm.
especially not knowing whether it's going to be February or April. I think if we set our sights too far out, we're assuming, and we don't want I don't think we want our patrons to think that we're assuming.
No, that's a good point.
That's a really
I
good
think
point.
that we
Yeah.
need to let our patrons know that we really want this, we believe in what we're doing, and make the bond the focus this year.
Yeah, and what strategies we need to do to have the bond pass successfully. I think
Right,
that's
right.
probably the biggest issue before us now would be is, you know, what strategically do we want to communicate to ensure the success of the bond?
Do you think that that informs even how we think about prioritization? Like, we have to think about what are our patrons?
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, we want to go through, and I think our strategy, you know, involving all of the buildings really helps that happen too, because there's something for everybody in it, hopefully, that we have enough money to really knock out a lot of constituents that they'd be like, heck yeah, I want to see that secure door at the elementary school, I want to see that bigger
Right.
locker room at the middle school, I want to see the bigger band room at the high school.
But I think talking beyond the bond gives our patrons the assumption that this is in the bag. And I think that there are people out there with questions, and our priority
Yeah.
should really be
Making a
everyone's on board.
prioritized list.
Yep.
Get
And
feedback
with
from
that,
those.
I think the communication, I mean, one part could be built in here is that we get the staff on board so that, you know, they're advocates for it as well. So even when there's teacher conferences, hey, did you know that we might get a new entrance to our elementary school?
Make
or
sure you
to-
vote for the.
Yeah,
for the bond
right, we want your
come
support,
February.
yeah, right.
What Tyler said makes a lot of sense though, because this is different than when we did our other bond. If it was for the new high school, it was set, you knew what was gonna happen. We have these projects, and we have to do a very, very good job of communicating what that's gonna be. And I don't know who said it, but the ones that I've seen that have been successful is where you have put people that, local people that are your messengers to go out and talk to their neighbors and their friends, because they're the ones that are gonna vote for this thing.
Yeah.
And we wanna make sure that they understand exactly what we're doing and how we're gonna be able to do this.
Target the influential people and reach out to them,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, we can help with coffees, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, you know, get the people that are centers of influence.
So I'm comfortable with that being one of the goals and just put in a few milestones.
we threw in the solvency goal. I don't know that, one of the things that we talked about in our office is just to make sure that you guys, and that doesn't have to be here, it could be just something that we report back to you and say, you know, board, I want to make sure that you know that this is what the goal should be, and we're in the target range there. Now, if you want to have that as far as part of that, that's fine, but I'm not saying that it has to be. I think it's important that we keep a goal on there, at least for a solvency ratio, and to try to look and see where we're at, and that we try to make sure that we keep that in a range. But what do you feel as board members or administrative team? I mean, that, you know, we've talked about it, Gail. We talked about where we're at right now with that solvency goal, but we can't really tell them that until later.
Yeah, it's really not strategic, it's only a result.
And the thing is that because the timing is, we're already in, you know, by the time the books are closed, and it'll be October before we report what fiscal year 17 actually is. So, and it's a moving target until then, and it's a range. So, you know, I think it's safe to, we can report it out, we can estimate it, but that's the best we can, and by the time it's final, it's old news. There's nothing you can do about it by that time.
Well, there's nothing you can do about it for that to affect the number in 2017, but there is something you do to affect 2018, and I think that's where the strategic part comes into play. Here's our number, here's kind of where we think we are. I think it helps us to decide is, are we going to add staff? Yeah. Are we going to make, you know, these, so I think it does become that, that's where the strategy, the number is just the number, that's just sort of the.
That's where we started with putting that on. What is that percentage that the board is most comfortable with of?
And if we're really peeling that apart, what you want as administrators is you know, what are our options as far as priorities given what the budget looks like, and being able to communicate what the budget looks like.
Well, and you know, it's just like when we knew we had to, you know, turn the ship around a little bit and get back on, you know, we knew that it wasn't, it was about what positions are we gonna prioritize that aren't gonna work, and as opposed to just keeping, you can't just keep coming and hammering, I want more, I want more, I want more, when that's not what we're doing, when we're trying to get to a different place.
Right, we have to make those hard.
I like the idea of the KPIs though, and I like that it would be a dialogue with the administrative team, to your point about, well, can we spend more or do we not spend more? And solvency was critical because, well, it started impacting our bonding capacity, right? Is it the only one? Probably not. What if, I mean, how many, when you work through with, forgetting his name now, the older Gary Sinclair, I mean, he comes, there's about, what, 5 or 7 different KPIs that he emphasizes. I mean, to me, the more that we as administrative team and board are more comfortable with where we're at with our KPIs in general, then we get more comfortable with, well, what can we do with this? Are we maximizing our resources? So I think solvency was good for last year. I would throw out maybe even reviewing KPIs quarterly as a team or something like that as a goal. I don't know. It's one thought that I had when I saw that, so that it would be a little broader and it can provoke, well, could we spend a little more pebble? Could we do a little bit more here, or how comfortable are we?
The thing about a solvency is solvencies are basically only measure general fund. So that's the only thing it's measured in. So it's that language is used in general funds where facilities, that's PEPL, capital projects, so you're talking different funds. So just keep that in mind when you're, for the language piece of that.
And I think it's really getting down to the okay, where are we at, and how does that impact our spending priorities for where we're at, you know, year to date.
Is it, you know, I mean, these are goals, so I'm trying to think, is it like just a shift in our process of how we talk and communicate, to what Tyler's saying? Is the word solvency, is that the important one there, or is it that we have some way to have an ongoing dialogue around budget priorities and how that impacts?
I think that's it.
And helping, you know, not only us with financial literacy, but the community, right? So one frustration of mine over the years has been, how do we get folks to make an impact with the legislators, right? I mean, comes up every year, and hey, let's go down to Des Moines, and well, very few go down to Des Moines or make a call to their legislator, right? And ultimately, I mean, that's the biggest impact of our resources.
Yeah, and then the big strategic issue that we have is just the continuation of with where we're at for crop prices and the drought, with what we're looking at right now. But, you know, strategically, you know, how do we want to think about another 1 or 2% next year, and how does that impact, you know, what we want to do going forward? You know, how are we going to adjust if the state legislature, you know,
some contingency planning.
That's kind of what I think.
At this level,
to me, that's the bigger strategic issue. Is how are we going to make sure that we can accomplish what it is we want to accomplish, knowing that the budgets are awfully tight from the state.
So how is the goal then that we have a process to have these conversations? Like, how do we write what we're talking about, or does it not involve? Should we not put that on this?
Well, I think it's
important.
Pretty important. Now we could put it on in the spring as well. So,
yeah.
But I do think that if it would be important feedback from the administrators of saying, gosh, here's the best way we can come up with using the dollars that we have, and we sure hope we get the 3 or 4% from the state. But if we don't, you know, here's how we're not going to throw off our 3 to 5 year long range plan. This is not touchable.
This is, I mean, is this a place where we want then, like, do we need another committee then to kind of manage and track this stuff? Like, because me as a board member, this is hard, like, Tyler said vocabulary, but like, you know, a lot of these words, I'm like, oh, I have to look up what this means, or, you know, all this stuff. Like, do we want to sort of empower another committee to work with administrators to kind of work through some of that stuff, people who are probably more financially literate?
Yeah, we sure have talked about it, and it's more maybe in the bigger picture of so as we move to the spring and we're saying, okay, how are we going to get the stakeholder feedback for our 3 to 5 year plan? You know, we're going to probably need some committee work for that. You know, we can put it in the context of maybe, you know, what are the committee structures that would be beneficial to you as administrators, because I think one of the big issues we have with only 5 board members, if we all 5 do everything, stuff doesn't get done because there just isn't enough meeting times in there. So there is a committee structure element, even a bigger issue probably than just the financial.
And sometimes maybe the committee structure is less about the finance piece, because I think, and John, you would probably agree, coming from a, you know, private sector, you know, banking kind of thing, that school finance is its own little bird. You know, it's just totally different than a lot of, I mean, there's obviously some accounting principles that are similar, but, you know, sometimes if you only approach it from that, but it's more about, hey, this is what we know, because we have Gail creating these reports and we know what we know.
Right.
Now, helping us prioritize what we do with that. Less about digging into the finance.
Yes, because it's really tricky, because 80% is people. Yeah. And so really, it's really, there are conversations to have, because it's really, you know, what people can we have to accomplish.
Maybe it's just having a few more board work sessions that are focused on this topic, or, I mean, I know I benefit from that, because this, you know, even 2 years in now, this feels, you know, the most foreign of all the stuff that we talk about at the board table is sort of the finance piece, whereas maybe that's as our role is to make sure there are resources to do all of the other things, and this is central to that whole deal.
As the administrators, you know, currently it is, you know, we have the extra money that we're going to get, we know that, and then you as the administrators do determine, okay, what are our priorities, and this is the amount of money that we're going to get next year. How does this all fit? So currently you already talk about it at a administrator's level.
But I think some of it gets to be more tactical from the standpoint of, I gotta make this year balance, and so, you know, what I'm kind of talking about is, you know, if it continues to be, you know, not what we need for funding, how does that change our strategic thinking?
And I think we're stronger, I think now than we have been as far as knowing where we're at budget-wise and what are some of those possibilities. But what you're saying is true from the standpoint, I don't think that we're gonna see things getting better in a real short period of time.
No.
I think we could be in for the 1 to 2% for, you know, a number of years.
And then, yeah, and then so how does that change how we think long-term
Right.
versus, okay,
Right.
you know, it's always a bad time to be thinking about it when we gotta get this done and submitted, and if we could have a strategic approach to that.
And what's great with what I've been here at Gilbert, you know, for the beginning of my 3rd year is, you know, we could probably overcome 1 year by dipping into our unspent balance, because we do have an unspent balance, which is unique because not everybody has a positive unspent balance. But that is a one-time thing. You know, as a district, you don't want to make that a practice. So you as a district, as you know, we have that, but you definitely, that's a short-term thing. It's not something you want to do every year. But that would be just an example of, okay, you know, we're gonna spend this amount of money from our unspent balance to do this, but we wouldn't want it for ongoing expenses.
Well, I think, you know, when you talk about people that you invite to this meeting, you know, it doesn't necessarily include, I mean, you can have a lot of people there, but I think when we talk about how do you change some of those things, some of it comes to like our fundraising entities, and that's having athletic boosters and GEF and, you know, PTO as part of that conversation, because they can be strategic then about what they're doing if on the same end, that if those two things are working together. And I think sometimes they don't, they're kind of almost like separate, like our fundraising is a little separate than what we do with general budget.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
So that like we knew, you know, we had a curriculum issue and we hadn't had any money, but we'd been gone, you know, forever, you know, stepping in and foundation being able to assist, or, you know, and the NPTO donated a large chunk to help us. And so I think that's keeping them in that conversation.
So we've had a lot of dialogue on this budget portion of it. What do we want to have a goal that we keep in there, and what does that look like? Would it be those quarterly reports that you were talking about, Tyler?
Well, I wonder if it's something like sharing our financial indicators with key stakeholders, starting here, but also, yeah, with key organizations, you know, just, and we need to wordsmith that a little bit more, but I mean, being better at this group, but also with the stakeholders of this district on what our finances are.
I agree.
And keeping it simple, but at the same time, getting better at just sharing.
And it's
Leveling
probably more
up
like,
their understanding.
Yeah.
it's probably similar to the previous goal where it's more milestone based than a quantifiable.
Which could be a work session or two, at least to get us on the same page. But then maybe you do a forum or you know, that my guess is when we get time to go to a bond, they're gonna go, well, thought you were just saying you didn't have any money.
Right.
Well, let's, I mean, that's part of it.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Be able to build it into the bonding plan, because it's gonna come up. Yep.
Right.
Can we afford this? And we have to be able to articulate, yes, we can, and here's why. Yep.
So
But I think but in the short term, something we can do to help our public and our current board members and our new board members coming in is, I feel that in the interest of time, we've really taken the consent agenda and we've sucked it in and condensed it and expected us as board members to do a lot of pre-reads at home, which is great, okay? But I appreciate the report that you provide for us, but I think that that needs to be more public. That maybe we should actually post the report or hit on a few things during consent agenda, because I feel that we finally have people in the audience and now people are watching on TV, but when we hit that piece where we're talking about our finances, that we're really just kind of like rubber stamping it. And I know that we're not. I know you look, and I know we all look. but I don't think perception is that we look, because we just, yep, we're done with the meeting, let's go. So I'd like to see us start to set the groundwork for having more public conversations about our finances, just by simply restructuring those few minutes around Gail's report at the board meeting.
I would just pull out of the consent agenda whatever it is, Kim, that you would like to have more discussion on, because then what? It shouldn't be on the consent agenda if we're planning.
Well,
I mean, and please let me clear. I don't want to go through it step by step. You know, I've been in those board meetings.
We've been in those meetings where we've gone through the checks.
Right.
And, you know,
No,
line
but
by
Gail's
line.
taking the time to like really highlight a
Sure.
few things from us. I think that we should just allow her to give us, you know, 2 or 3 minutes to hit those things that have jumped out at her or Lindsay and talk about them, so our public starts to get a sense for the things that we're looking at.
And I'm all for that.
Okay.
But I'm just saying, let's pull it out of the consent
Okay.
agenda. Because, you know, whatever part of Gail's report that we want to make sure we hit every time.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that the things that are in the consent agenda, that at any given time a board member says, I want to take this out of the consent
Sure.
agenda and talk
Right.
about it. But I want to have, you know, what we agree to as a board, you know, talked about every meeting. We don't want it in the consent agenda if we're going to talk about it every meeting. And it can be, you know,
Yep.
a summary report or whatever it is, but
Maybe
I-
it even just says board secretary summary
Yeah.
or something. But we're going to be asking our public for a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to ever think that we're just kind of like sliding things under the table because we don't talk about them. So,
We
Right,
can
so,
change the agenda.
so my recommendation back to Lindsay's question was share key financial indicators, and that
Yep.
would be something
Yep.
that, yeah, Gail may have it all, everything we want, but let's have a conversation, and I think Gail train us to some of that,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
That's what you're
Yep.
saying.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
But then that's touched on every month, but some of them, they don't change. So some of them, it's twice a year. You go, okay, let's get this out because now we've got some new information. But I think for everything that we've got going on, it still needs to be some key indicators.
I agree.
And that's what we need to agree on.
Yep. Yep.
So I'd say share key financial indicators and something to the effect of with stakeholders and,
The board meeting is a good place to do it.
yeah, yeah,
Especially now that they're public. There are people watching.
yeah.
You know,
And
or not
And
public,
I
but
think that will be very,
Fan base.
yeah, I think that'll fit very well with the first one on the facilities as well.
I agree.
Because for that to be successful, people will need to understand where we're at
Yep,
financially.
yep, totally agree.
Makes good sense. Moving on then. Okay. Culture of continuous learning. You can take a look at that. Talked about trying to make sure that, not trying to, having a professional development plan that will make sure that the following groups have a measurement by a self-evaluation tool. And then just the communication portion of it. And again, I don't know how, if you want to look at one or the other, but I know that we talked about this, and I've heard this, and maybe I just look at it from my standpoint, that communication, again, we want to make sure that we communicate. We are in a society, we are in a community that likes to know what's happening. And I don't know if we, how we want to measure that second one or not, but I know that I think that people like to know what's happening, and especially when we're going for a bond or a potential bond, we got to make sure that we're doing everything that we can.
Did you get much feedback, Lindsay, on your email out on the Halo letter?
No.
Also, you sent that letter, sorry, it's tangential, but you sent that letter today. That was great because the actual text was in the body of that email. I didn't have to like click 7 links
Yep.
to get it.
I agree.
I was like, yes, this is awesome.
And it was a great email.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, I have thoughts on number 2, but let's talk about number 1 first.
Okay.
I just think it ties back into our 21st century also.
And that one is, that elements of that have been there for a couple of years, and it just, that's dependent upon you, the staff, that, well, that's happening. And at the board level, it's not something that we're going to go, okay, well, let's look at this one, look at that one. But it's supported at the board level that that's important.
Yeah, and I'd like the feedback, as to, how it's going in general, not on any one person, but yeah, heck, we're doing this, we're doing the walk-arounds, implementing this, and, you know, here's how we see that fitting into professional development, and how that's going.
So are we good with that?
How do we make sure, sorry, I'm gonna ask one question on this one, then like, how do we make sure that that self-evaluation tool and what we're talking about there, that it's effective, that it's getting people engaged in where we're going as a district, getting not people, sorry, our staff and our teachers engaged with where we're going and learning along those lines? And I don't know how, if we need to write it that way. I guess I'm just curious, because it's one thing to be like self-evaluate, they're like, I'm failing at this, not interested, you know, and you're like, oh, we checked that off. So how do we talk about like that we're looking at our professional development and saying this is effective to get to go where we want?
Because those are the questions you ask. So it's not really, it's more about, you know, thinking about our goals of PBL, 21st century, those types of things. And, you know, part of a little bit of Amy and my building is we have some literacy adoption kind of stuff, so that'll be part of our PD plan as a whole too. However, is saying like, did the professional development opportunities we gave you give you a solid understanding, you know, kind of rating where they felt like that?
We need to get that. We need to get that information. We need to ask that information after our PDs. We do need to do a
Doesn't
better job
this
of
kind
that.
of sort of apply?
That is another piece of it. Yeah,
I
definitely.
mean, why does that have to stop with kids?
You just want to make sure that that measurement is of value,
Right.
self-assessed.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to measure it, which is great. It's the next thing that I'm actually interested in is like, are we doing the right, and I'm not saying we're not, this is not at all what I'm implying, is are we doing the right professional development to hit the goals that we're talking about on those top sections?
Well, I think that this is going to be one thing that's going to tell us that. I mean, if we're stagnant, if we're not moving, I think that that's more data that would be like, oh my gosh, you know, we gotta up what we're doing.
Yep.
Because we're not seeing our kids move.
Does that answer your question for that one?
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Okay, so what are your thoughts on the last one?
Oh, I would just remove, like, it's almost just words. It's more than just communicate district priorities. It's like the district story. Like, what are we doing?
The state of the district.
Yeah. Well, so it's not like because I mean you can communicate the district priorities by sending out an email, whatever we talked about tonight, and like, okay, we got that. Like it's how do we have this sort of ongoing, Lindsay really, well, not just Lindsay, everybody at this table, like how we've did a
Collaborate and
website.
communicate with the district, right?
Yes, exactly. Keep our patrons informed. How, you know, how do we, and again, I'd say last year we made huge strides from everybody here, that we did a great job keeping the sort of patrons informed of what's going on. Like, how do we kind of keep that up? So it's beyond just district priorities is the only thing I'd say.
So is there a measure, did the committee come up with any sort of measure tool of that? Like a survey?
We
or
did that
whatever?
survey. You were in there. I think maybe you helped conduct the survey from, was it patrons and staff?
Yep.
And it was like, I can't remember, the numbers were like in their 90s, of like people have heard this phrase, they understand this phrase. So we did have some measures in there.
Every student, every day.
Every student, every day. But there were some other questions that dove down
Yeah.
deeper. I
Yeah.
can't recall them right now.
Like, what does it mean to you? Where do you see evidence of that?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, thank you. And I thought that
But even more basic, which would be, were you aware of this, or how did you become aware of this, or, you know, as an example, and it's not district, but I continue to talk about the Gilbert Trail project, which at this point I would assume everybody's heard of it, and it was at the baseball awards tonight, right? And I decided, well, I'm gonna take a couple minutes and tell people. And how many of you have heard of this? And less than half the hands went up, and this
Yeah.
was just a couple weeks ago, right? So, you know, measuring, are we telling our story? Who's hearing it? How are they hearing it? I mean, those would be some of the measures.
Yeah.
Not just, you know, details, but just in general.
What I'm noticing a little bit is we have lots and lots of avenues. And then I still get somebody who, you know, well, I didn't even know there was preschool sign up.
Right.
And, you know, there is a certain element of active participation
Right.
that has to happen to get,
Yes.
and I said, well, it was in the newsletter, it was on the website, I don't do that, I don't read those, I'm like,
Yeah.
because.
You didn't come over and have coffee with me and tell me.
Interestingly, some of the data we gotten originally is quit pushing an email to me every time something happens.
Yeah.
And so you try to balance that with, I don't know where to put that,
Right.
but yeah, that's a little bit trying to, the communication committee is going to solve that one for me.
But the survey
Yeah.
to parents, email was the most preferred way to get information.
Right, but they only want it when they want it. That's the problem.
So when
How do you pick
And then
and choose?
read the most important part to me.
So like that's the thing. I mean, we need sort of both that push and that pull mechanism. Maybe push emails, but they also can go query off the website what they want. But regardless, I think to Tyler's point is like if we say this is one of our, and I don't think we have to figure out the measurements tonight, but if we say that this is one of our goals of sort of like consistent communication with our patrons, we probably should at some point have some way to measure did we hit this or not.
It would seem to me the opportunity is to establish some benchmark that,
91%.
Year over year, well,
No, I'm just kidding.
of whatever, right?
Yeah.
Year over year, here's how we're doing.
Number
Because
of-
it'll continue to change.
Yep.
I mean, yeah, it could be simple as like number of emails sent or videos produced, or I don't know what it is.
You're part of the communication committee, right? So if something's put onto the website, does it automatically hit Twitter, Facebook, all of the other avenues?
Not right now.
Okay, can we do that?
Yeah, all we have to do is we'd have to set up unified, like the Gilbert District Twitter account, Gilbert District Facebook account. Right now, I think we have per building or per administrator
Right.
pieces of that.
I mean, we have the
We've-
district Twitter.
We have district,
Oh, we do?
district Facebook.
But is it,
Oh,
but
let's
is
do it.
it
Let's look
linked?
it
Are
up.
they linked?
I don't think so.
Okay, because like
We
when
do
I
though.
post on
We
behalf
can't
of
look it
my
up.
business, it hits Instagram, it hits Twitter, it hits everything all at one time. So wherever people hang out, I have a better chance because not everyone's on one or the
Right.
other. And I, quite honestly, have a hard time with the website
Let's talk
and
about
trying to
that.
find what I want to find.
Let's do
So
that, 'cause
I
remember when
rely
Jen
on
posted
other
three different
sources.
places and
She'd
you put it on
forget
a
or-
website and
yeah.
somebody else put an app out.
But it should be, I mean, it could be set up so that one entry happened and it went
Oh yeah,
without
certainly.
any thought process, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So for the goal, maybe work on
Yeah.
some sort of a measurable.
Right.
Yeah.
Can I backtrack really quick? No.
All the way back to the elementary school, or how far back?
Yeah.
No, I just,
Oh.
so on the 21st Century Learning under APR, we kind of have a bunch of words there, but we didn't, but we didn't talk about any of those words. Like we kind of said, and then the APR goals, the kind of what we had talked about, which was sort of precipitated some of that information, was that let's not focus as much on just the goal itself, but how did we get to the goal? So that's where some of that ICDP language came in, but I guess my question is, and if you're not sure what an ICDP looks like, I have a couple, so you can kind of see this action-based, what the idea behind it what is, and how we research which strategies are going to be most effective, and then collect data on them, and then cull out the ones that, yeah, that didn't work, we got to do something different, tweak and revise and everything. So I have a couple examples, but I don't know, maybe you just want to leave it as APR goals for this point in time. And then,
Can you give me 2-sentence understanding of the difference between APR and IC?
so the APR are our goals, so it's annual progress report. So those are the reading, math, science, that's just the
Yeah.
general goal. What an individual career development plan is so our teachers create a goal, and most of mine do team-based goals. It's a little different at other buildings because of they're not everybody teaching the same content. But my 5 teachers teach all the same content, so they create a goal. So for example, like kindergarten this year made their ICDP based on studying whether Fundacious was effective or not. So they collected data on it, and then what they're able to do is say, this is how we implemented, this is what our scores. And so it's not so much about whether we met it or didn't meet it, because they're usually aiming for 100% of their kids to get something, and that's awesome. But what they're really trying to say is, okay, is this an effective strategy for us, or do we need to go back to the drawing board? So for example, what kindergarten did at the end, they measured letter sounds. Did Foundations help us with letter sounds? Well, and it did. We know because in the spring, in 15-16, 78% of our kids passed the letter sounds. In 16, 17, 94% of our kids passed the letter sounds assessment. So we know that that was an effective strategy. But what they did next though is said, you know what though, our sight words weren't that great on that assessment. So now we need to make sure that we have changed instruction to do that piece as well. And so that's what their measures will look like, and it kind of is an action, it's action-based research on a strategy that they want to implement. In this case, it happened to be an entire program, but a strategy they want to implement.
That seems way more useful to me than talking about 91%, 96% stuff.
Yeah. Now, these things lead into
Absolutely.
our reading goal
right,
and our math goal.
right.
They have to be connected in that way.
Right.
You know, so, but I don't know.
Don't you pass those around so they
I
have
can give you, some samples.
Is that institutionalized around the district, or is that something that's here and there?
The ICDP as a whole is.
Okay.
What we have noticed a little bit is Amy and I, it's a little bit more the teachers have a lot more autonomy into how they create their goal. I know Mike and Vic, that's their goal, to move that way as well, to have some, so it's not in the past not good or bad necessarily, but it's been very like everybody's going to do their ICDP based on AIW. That was, for a lot of years that was, and as opposed to maybe, yes, AIW is going to be one of those pieces that help us get towards a strategy, because we'll score lessons, but like, maybe, it's the implementation of a strategy in the instruction actually that's what we want to aim our goals towards. So yes, all the language is similar. It will be tweaking a little bit I guess like I said back where the autonomy of the teacher to figure out what they want to do to help build that.
And we talk at the intermediate a lot about don't just choose a safe goal. Like take a risk.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Let's work hard. If it's not the exact success we maybe wanted, but we tried, we learned, now what are we going to do from it?
I think what we want is like teachers engaged in innovating and really like, I don't know.
Continuous improvement, just every year we're looking at making something better.
Well, and I use an example. My 2 special education teachers and my 2 reading specialists have partnered together over the last couple of years, and they write a goal that literally says 100% of our students, who mind you are the most struggling readers that we have in the district, will meet the grade level benchmarks at the end of the year. I mean, that's our goal. That's what we want to do. We're not going to create a goal, 80% of them. Well, what's that mean? Say about the other 20%? Which two aren't going to count, So I've been very excited about that. Now, do we always meet that goal? Nope, we do not always meet it. But that gives them cause to reflect about what they need to do to move forward. So,
and like working their tails off to
This answers the question in the July meeting. One of the things that I jotted down that you guys had asked was you wanted to know the strategies that bring about these high APR scores. I think you might have been the person who was asking. And so that's why you're seeing this information, so that you can kind of have an idea of what are those strategies that we're talking
because what I'm driving at is really, the engagement and all of that stuff that we talked about earlier. Right?
So here's one of my questions for you is, do we leave the goal, the district will reach their annual progress reports, as reported by, obviously, our end of the year scores, and monthly reports on strategies being used in the classroom. So, kindergarten coming in and talking to you a little bit about their ICDP, or, it doesn't have to be, not every single teacher will come in, but, when we have some of those teacher reports, some of them are sort of driven on, these are the action-based research projects we have going on right now to help us meet those things. So it's measurable in terms of hearing about it and learning about it and knowing what the connection is. It's not necessarily connected to the ICDP itself. I like the idea of them sharing that information. The one thing I will say is, this is the piece that I feel like sometimes teachers might feel is a little bit more evaluative. The ICDP is part of their teacher evaluation process. But it's not part of the process in terms of saying like, you didn't meet the goal, you failed, now you don't meet that standard. It's more, are they going through the process? Are they reflecting? Are they learning? Are they changing things that they're doing? So,
well, as a board member, this means more to me than just knowing that you hit a number. I think if the goal is what it is, but this is what you're reporting on month to month, that's just proof and
for me, it would be pulling out the strategies there that are really working on the communicating, collaborating, the creativity, to say, gosh, here's how that's going to, here's how it's assisting where we think we need to be moving. And I get that it's a little bit different thing, but you know, those strategies that are involving those things. But certainly that might be getting too mixed up with the two different measures. But that has a lot of interest to me is the strategies that are really, so when you talk about the AIW and those things and say, John, we're doing this stuff. Well, here it is. Here's an example. Here's how it fits into strategically, you know, where we're going.
So how would the teachers view that as a goal? You were sort of, it's part of their own assessment.
Yeah, I mean,
so
I feel like
you
what's
gotta be-
made them so successful in Amy and my building is this is something they feel like they need to work on to help us meet the goals that we have. And so it's not me saying, well, you better do this, you know, it's really, so I think that's the piece. I don't know that a teacher in my building that would have any concern at all about coming and sharing what they did, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of neat, right? We would be saying, gosh, this has been very successful, but because we're using this strategy, and for them to be able to do that from the board, we're really doing what we want our teachers and students to do, right? We're letting them, you know, come and say about what's really working well and that. So I think they'd be collaborating to do this, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it seems like it fits into some of the things we want.
Yeah, I mean, I would support that being in there and be careful with the wording, I guess, so as to not create any anxiety for the teachers, but at the same time, it could be as simple as in share some examples with the board or something like that.
Yeah, and that's why, because right now it was kind of a conglomeration of it, so I thought, how to get that, I just wanted to, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take more time.
No, but
great.
this is a good
good.
conversation because I think
Clarify that a
it
little
starts
bit.
to fit in, because I think we're thinking, you know, just the scores and so in the past, but I think the strategies are
Yeah.
extremely helpful.
So are we pretty good with the goals right now
Yeah.
and we'll get those out? Are we okay, John, to move on to the next one? That's the personnel. Can you bring that one up? They're gonna come at you again with some more personnel on Monday. Oh, I'm sorry.
So Lindsay, you're going to, just so I
Well-
understand, you're gonna write kind of what we all talked about, send us another one
Yes.
version of it?
Yep, you okay with that, Brian?
Yeah.
And did we put something in there with regard to kind of laying the groundwork for, you know, kind of somebody putting together a plan? I don't know if it needs to be in there, but you know, what's that gonna look like, you know, from now as we transition to kicking this off, you know, in January? That's something I think we want to go to the board, and it might not be a goal, but at any rate, I want to make sure, since we're talking about that now, that we have some communications between now and January of, okay, this is kind of what we're thinking as an administrative team, how this is going to look, and here's kind of what that timeline looks like, and yeah, we have the resources, we need to do this, or no, we don't, and we think we need this, and that.
I know we went a little bit longer than what I thought, but I think that the conversation has been tremendous. Thank you for everyone for taking the time. I know you're on a very busy schedule, so we'll get you the personnel report. I'm not going to read those to you if you have some questions on those. Do you have any questions on those?
No. I just like how many times it's changed after you put it on the Dropbox. Like I love watching that little.
It's another moving target. Yeah, I'm trying to finalize September payroll, and it's really hard because we still have some paras. I don't even know how many
To
paras.
hire.
Yes.
If you know anybody looking for a job, please send them my way.
If you know anyone that's looking for food service, we're also looking for food service.
Yeah, and did you notice Amy Griffith?
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Oh my goodness, that is going to be
Moonlighting is cool.
Yeah, I thought you liked this job.
same building.
Yeah.
No, different building, different building.
I'll
Yeah, you could've
entertain a motion to approve the personnel report.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Stands approved.
Who had that?
Oh, also move. Sorry, I was
Got
confused.
first
So
and
move.
second.
There we go.
Okay.
Let's get that right.
Brian.
You want to be first, right?
I did. I was really confused by the word. It's my bedtime.
Got it.
Is there any other business to come before the board?
Move to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye. I love getting that one.
Thanks, everyone. Good discussion.
Thank you guys for touring.
Yeah.
We just
Yeah.
thought that was important for you guys to see
Oh, I think it's good.
all the things
Yeah.
that